Welcome to the monthly edition of the Tidbits in Time Almanac. For each individual day, you can look in the show notes below for a link to additional information about that day's tidbit.
April 1st, 2013. Uncle Sam wants kitties. The U.S. Army sent out a seemingly official press release announcing their latest additions to the U.S. Armed Forces, claiming that drafting cats to serve their country would cut down on military spending. Officials went on to say that it was time those feckless felines got to work. As Sergeant First Class Tyler Radmall wisely stated, not only will the Army have a more cost-effective working animal, but we'll be doing our part in getting them off the streets and finding them employment. But while Army brass seemed bullish on the idea, they did note that the canine units were not taking too kindly to the new recruits, resulting in more than a little fighting like cats and dogs. Turns out, the press release was just an elaborate April Fool's Day joke. April 2nd, 1982. Argentina invaded and occupied the Falkland Islands and its territorial dependency, the South Georgia and South Sandwich Islands. It was a big mistake, because those islands had been claimed by Great Britain since 1841. But that was long ago, and Britannia no longer ruled the waves, so England was initially reluctant to enter a war with Argentina. It was too far away, at more than 8,000 miles, didn't have much significance, supply lines were weak, and it would take too long to even send ships to contest the invasion. Argentina was counting on those difficulties, and many Argentine leaders thought that England would demur. But England had Maggie Thatcher as Prime Minister, and she was a force not to be trifled with. She ordered a naval and marine force to immediately be shipped to the area to militarily contest the invasion. England subsequently won the Falklands War in just 74 days. April 3rd, 1783. Washington Irving was born in New York City. He nicknamed his hometown Gotham City, and he coined the phrase the almighty dollar. He also popularized the myth that Europeans before and during the time of Columbus thought the earth was flat, even though for several hundred years everybody in the Western world knew that the world was spherical. Irving began a hoax which led to a viral marketing campaign claiming he was owed money by one Dietrich Knickerbocker, and if Knickerbocker didn't pay up, Irving would release the mysterious Knickerbocker manuscript. So much interest was generated in the press that when Irving eventually did publish his satirical Knickerbocker's History of New York, it was a great success. April 4th, 1789. The opening day for the first U.S. Congress. These senators and congressmen came to be called the most important and productive Congress, having to write laws to found the executive, judicial, and legislative branches of the government. Most importantly, they had to pass the Bill of Rights as amendments to the U.S. Constitution. The researchers at the National Archives have collected more than 14,000 documents and published more than 20 volumes, everything they've been able to find written about the actual debates, newspaper articles, and personal letters that relate to that first Congress. April 5th, 1614. Mata Oka, also known as Amanute, and nicknamed Pocahontas. She was the daughter of Native American Chief Powhatan. After her previous husband died, and during a year as a hostage to the English settlers, she became a Christian, adopting the name of Rebecca, and she married a widower, John Rolfe. Though she died at the young age of 21, she had 2 children, and as the centuries have passed, now more than 100,000 people can trace their ancestry directly to her. April 6, 1929. The Louisiana House of Representatives passed a bill of impeachment against Governor Huey Pierce Long, Jr. Nicknamed Kingfish, the governor had become a force in Louisiana politics, using class warfare tactics to pit the rich against the poor during the Great Depression. He came to power by claiming that the New Deal socialism didn't go far enough, and in his state he expanded welfare programs, organized road construction, bridges, and the building of schools. He also built a new state capitol building, still the tallest in the country. As to the proposed impeachment, the Louisiana Senate failed to convict, and the governor remained in office. He later became a U.S. Senator, and he was assassinated by a political opponent, and I have personally seen the bullet holes. April 7th, 1969. Happy birthday, Internet. The thing we now call the Internet was born, or maybe it was conceived, by the publication of RFC-1, which some people date to April 1st, 1969. A request for comments, RFC, is a type of document collaboratively invented by techie Steve Crocker and some of his friends to help engineers and computer scientists. RFCs were used to record unofficial notes for the development of ARPANET. The first RFCs were written on regular paper, with regular typewriters, and distributed by hand or via snail mail. Not official, and with no rules relating to membership, the first RFCs were usually requests for comments instead of tersely written final drafts. There is some controversy from people who claim January 1, 1983 is the real beginning, when the National Science Foundation became operational with a university network backbone. April 8, 2019. A Dutch F-16 Flying Falcon jet fighter scored a direct hit on itself during a training exercise. Bullets from its own guns pierced the fuselage. The pilot was able to make an emergency landing at Leeuwarden Air Base after sustaining considerable damage to its engine after being hit by rounds from its own 20mm cannon. There are other recorded shoot-downs of jet aircraft by its own guns, though they are rare. April 9, 1865. General Robert E. Lee, West Point, 1829, dressed in an immaculate uniform, met General Ulysses S. Grant, West Point, 1843, at a private house near Appomattox Courthouse Village and surrendered the Army of Northern Virginia, effectively ending the war between the states. According to the traditions of a surrender, Lee offered his sword and his horse. Grant allowed Lee to keep his sword and horse, Traveler, and Grant allowed the officers under the command of Lee to keep their horses. After the event, Grant said that he felt sad and depressed at the downfall of a foe who had fought so long and valiantly and had suffered so much for a cause. Some 28,000 Confederate soldiers stacked their arms the next day, and when Union soldiers began to cheer and celebrate, Grant ordered them to be silent out of respect. April 10th, 1938. Joseph Don Dandy Don Meredith was born in Mount Vernon, Texas. After a star football career in high school in Mount Vernon, college at SMU, which subsequently retired his jersey number, and the pros in Dallas, he became an announcer. Famously teamed up with Howard Cosell and Frank Gifford, Dandy Don added a lot more to the game than merely broadcasting the facts. April 11th, 1970. Apollo 13 was launched. 2 days later, on April the 13th, the spacecraft suffered a small onboard explosion that jeopardized the oxygen systems, and Commander Jim Lovell radioed back,
"Hey, Houston, we've had a problem here."
They abandoned the moon landing, took one orbit around it, and did a slingshot back to Earth, just one of many workarounds that ultimately ended with a successful splashdown. The mission has been described as a successful failure, in that the astronauts got home safely, despite not achieving a moon landing, and despite the dire nature of their predicaments. April 12, 1949. Scott Frederick Turow was born in Chicago, Illinois. He became famous for his autobiographical book about his experiences as a first-year law student in 1L. He later wrote 11 fictional books, many of which were bestsellers, and 4 of which were made into movies or television scripts. Presumed Innocent in 1987 with Harrison Ford, The Burden of Proof in 1990 with Brian Dennehy, Reversible Errors in 2004 with Tom Selleck, and Innocent in 2011 starring Bill Pullman. April 13, 1743. Thomas Jefferson was born in Albemarle County, Virginia. In successfully arguing against the institution of a central bank, what we would describe today as the Federal Reserve System, he said, "The system of banking is a blot left in all our constitutions, which, if not covered, will end in their destruction. I sincerely believe that banking institutions are more dangerous than standing armies, and that the principle of spending money to be paid by posterity is but swindling futurity on a large scale." How would he feel about our present plague of inflation caused by the Federal Reserve and the U.S. Congress? April 14, 1828. Noah Webster published his American Dictionary of the English Language. Quite a few years ago, my late wife Alexandra and I bought an 1828 reprint for our young boys because the definitions and examples are so much more sparkling and enlightening than the vanilla, politically correct drivel used in dictionaries of today, though thumbing through a giant book isn't nearly as fast as looking something up online. Webster wanted to standardize American English so that people across the country would be able to understand each other. He spent 20 years working on his dictionary, which contained 70,000 words, and he did all the research and the handwriting of the book by himself. He is believed to be the last lexicographer to complete a dictionary without any assistance. The dictionary Webster produced had exactly the result he intended. His standardized spelling and pronunciation guides helped ensure that Americans who speak English use more or less the same English. The United States has the fewest dialects of any major country in history. Noah Webster inspired our cultural independence. April 15, 1658. William Paterson was born in Dumfriesshire, Scotland. He became a trader who built up a considerable fortune. In 1691, he co-founded the Bank of England. He proposed a £1.2 million loan to the English government to act as the sole banker and sole issuer of currency and gold for the government. He was granted an exclusive charter in 1694. Since then, the Bank of England has become the model for other national banks in almost all nations, including our Federal Reserve System. There have been many problems with this model during the succeeding 3+ centuries, particularly with respect to the debasement of the currency. April 16, 1971. Peter Billingsley Michelson was born in New York City. He starred as Ralphie Parker in the movie A Christmas Story, an adaptation of the famous radio play by Gene Shepard, telling a classic tale of a boy who wants Santa to bring him an official Red Ryder carbine-action BB gun. Of course, his mother and his teacher warned him,
"You'll shoot your eye out! You'll shoot your eye out!"
April 17, 1961. Gregory Richard Gianforte was born in San Diego, California. He is a multimillionaire who was a software engineer who retired and became a U.S. congressman and later the governor of Montana. He and his wife have made significant contributions to Christian and conservative organizations. He has a temper, along with an assault conviction from pushing down and punching a political reporter. As governor, he signed a bill that lifted a statewide mask mandate, a bill that limited health care providers, hospitals, and all other businesses from requiring vaccinations of their employees, and a bill to ban businesses from requiring customers to be vaccinated nor requiring vaccine passports. April 18, 1906. An earthquake struck San Francisco. Measurements later established that the San Andreas Fault had moved about 23 feet. A 3-day fire broke out that destroyed about 80% of the city. There is some speculation that the cost of the rebuilding of San Francisco was part of the cause of the Panic of 1907 that led to a volatile economy, which gave rise to the Federal Reserve Act of 1913. The earthquake began shortly before dawn, spanning 300 miles of the San Andreas Fault. The destruction of City Hall and the Hall of Records enabled thousands of Chinese immigrants to fraudulently and successfully claim citizenship. April 19, 1787. Erastus Smith, also known as Deaf Smith, was born in Dutchess County, New York. He lost his hearing during childhood. He settled in San Antonio de Bear and fought in the Texas Revolution, being unusually skilled at capturing couriers and in general intelligence gathering. Smith served as a captain in the Texas Rangers. April 20th, 1841. Edgar Allan Poe published a short story, The Murders in the Rue Morgue, referring to a fictional street in Paris, France. The plot is a gruesome double murder of Madame L'Espanaye and her daughter. It was not the first mystery, but it featured a brilliant detective who solved a crime by following clues, accompanied by a dim-witted sidekick, a mediocre policeman, and the story had a red herring. I'm sure you can detect a plot pattern. Later authors gave us Sherlock Holmes, Travis McGee, Perry Mason, Nero Wolfe, Sam Spade, Hercule Poirot, and thousands of others. It has become one of the most popular genres in fiction. I just did a little research and found 170,582 such murder mystery books currently available for purchase in the U.S. April 21st, 1864. Karl Emil Maximilian Max Weber was born in Erfurt, Saxony, Prussia. He wrote The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism. Is it really possible that widespread Christianity among the populace helps society progress? In our current time, how do countries where Protestant ethics are alive and well compare to other countries of the world? April 22nd, 2022. National Jelly Bean Day. There have been jelly beans in the U.S. since 1861, when Boston confectioner William Schraft urged people to send them to Union soldiers fighting in the war between the states. When Beatlemania broke out in the U.S., crowds pelted the singers with jelly beans during concerts, especially directed toward George Harrison, who was widely reported to enjoy eating them. April 23, 1946. The Vespa was patented in Italy. The word means wasp in Italian. They are scooters with pressed steel unibodies, an enclosure for the engine, a flat floorboard for the feet, and a prominent front flaring for wind protection. In the U.S., teenaged girls favored Vespas instead of the bigger, more powerful motorcycles popular with teenaged boys. Vespas especially took off when they were featured in the movie Roman Holiday, starring Audrey Hepburn and Gregory Peck, resulting in the sale of more than 100,000 units. Italy is still the largest market for Vespas, followed by England. April 24th, 1932. The mass trespass of Kinderscout occurred. In rural England, large landowners hired gamekeepers to maintain their properties. Hiking has been a popular pastime in Great Britain for generations, but increasing tensions between ramblers and wardens began leading to occasional violence. After a large protest and a media campaign, and a long time later, legislation was passed to allow the right to freely walk on mapped open-access land. April 25, 1961. Robert Norton Noyce was granted a patent for an integrated circuit. He went on to co-found Intel with Gordon Moore and was later joined by Andy Grove. Noyce wrote a paper on the physics of tunneling diodes, but never finished it because he was discouraged by his boss, Nobel laureate William Shockley. 2 years later, Japanese physicist Leo Esaki won a Nobel Prize for publishing the same idea. Some 27 years later, the Nobel Committee awarded the Nobel Prize to Jack Kilby, who co-invented the integrated circuit, but the committee did not recognize the part of co-inventor Robert Noyce in that invention. Also, Robert Noyce mentored many a Silicon Valley startup. April 26, 1785. Jean-Jacques Fougère Audubon, Americanized as John James Audubon, was born in Les Cayes, Saint-Dominique. He came to the U.S. from France on a falsified passport to avoid conscription in the Napoleonic Wars, tried various jobs and businesses, but failed at all of them. But he found his niche as an illustrator of birds and made significant contributions to bird anatomy. Audubon discovered 25 new species of American birds and 12 new subspecies. April 27, 1953. During the Korean War, the Soviets introduced the MiG-15 jet, which outmatched the U.S. jets in that it was faster and more maneuverable than our F-80 and F-86 jets. Eventually, superior training and tactics prevailed for the U.S., and American engineers upgraded our F-80 and our F-86 planes. Also, General Mark W. Clark initiated Operation Moolah to induce a defector to bring us one of the MiGs to study. It worked, except the defector didn't know about the reward because he was just defecting so that he could live in freedom. April 28, 1926. Nell Harper Lee, she goes by Harper, was born in Monroeville, Alabama. In 1960, she published To Kill a Mockingbird, about a small-town Southern lawyer, Atticus Finch, who is called on to defend an African-American, Tom Robinson, accused of a heinous crime. The story is told through the voice of the young daughter of the attorney, Scout, semi-autobiographical of the author, who has a friend, Dill, modeled on her real-life friend, Truman Capote. The 1962 movie version, with Gregory Peck as the lead, became a big hit. I cannot count how many attorneys I've met over the years who have told me that movie was the reason they decided to become lawyers. Unlike them, I found neither the book nor the movie to be all that interesting. April 29, 1855. Some 75 camels arrived in Indianola, Texas, on the Matagorda Bay and trekked to Camp Verde for Army use. Because of the weather and terrain in the American Southwest, it seemed like a good idea, but it never caught on. The experiment was abandoned in about 1865. April 30th, 1900. Railroad engineer Jonathan Luther Casey Jones died in a train wreck near Vaughn, Mississippi. He was driving the Cannonball Express from Memphis, Tennessee to Canton, Mississippi, trying to make up time because the train was overdue, when his fireman warned him that there was another train up ahead. He ordered his fireman to jump, but he stayed on the train, one hand on the brake and the other on the whistle. Though the Cannonball Express crashed and Jones was killed, all the passengers were saved because of his efforts to slow down the train.
That's all for now. I look forward to hanging out with you next month. To get tidbits emailed to you for free, please visit tidbitsintime.com.